Hey everyone, it's January 13, 2013. I'm Rene Ritchie, and tonight we're talking CES and iPhone and iPad rumors. This is the iMore Show. So tonight I am back from Las Vegas and I am flying solo. Although that is not absolutely true, I have the fantastic iMore community with me in the chat room. If you've never been to the chat room before, you should definitely check it out. It's imore.com/live, and every time we do a live show, the chat room is there to keep us company, keep us honest, and keep us on topic or off topic, depending on how they feel at any given moment. So I think, first of all, we're going to talk about CES 2013 while it's still fresh. Every year, my goal is to kind of bring the iMore community with me to CES. And some years I feel like I do that better than others. I don't feel like I particularly did that well this year. I got a little bit too caught up in the daily grind of, covering the news and getting stuff out there. So this podcast to me is an opportunity to do that. CES takes place in Las Vegas, and that is more true than most other shows because ostensibly it's in the Las Vegas Convention Center, but CES is so big. It's not just mobile, it's not just phone and tablets. There are cars and automobiles there, televisions there. Almost every segment of consumer electronics is there in a size such that they could have their own show at any other place in the world. It's ginormous. It spills from the convention center into the nearby hotels, the Venetian, the Hilton attached to the conference center, Mandalay Bay. And because CES is so big, anyone that wants to hold their own event gets pushed further around the periphery. So it really is almost like the entirety of Las Vegas becomes one ginormous show for the entire week. And because of the nature of the show, you have everyone from retail buyers, people who shop for the Apple Store, for Best Buy, for any electronic store you can imagine anywhere in the world, come by there to see what they're going to be selling into the next year and into the next holiday season. So you have also the media, people, bloggers like me. You have mainstream media like the US broadcast channels, international broadcast channels. You have smaller bloggers who cover very specific niche areas. Basically, at any scale you can imagine, there are journalists there. So that's the secondary layer. Then there are the actual consumers because it's open to everybody. So people can buy a pass and go and look at booths and see what they will be able to buy very soon in the near future. And all of those layers kind of coexist together at any given booth. Especially the larger booths, you might have some people in the back having meetings with buyers or with press, people at the front of the booth trying to talk to journalists, trying to talk to consumers. It's very, very complicated and it's very, very dynamic. It's almost like trying to cross a street in Guangdong or Guangzhou, any big city in mainland China. There's just layer upon layer of movement going on. Trying to walk through the LG booth is almost like trying to walk through a crowd lined up in front of any large sporting event entryway at any given time. It's just at a baffling scale, and that makes it interesting to manage because you have some tech sites, some sites in general that bring dozens and dozens of people and cover every possible thing they can and pump out enormous amounts of content. And you have other people who just look for one thing or look for an overarching trend. And you have all these different approaches all in one place. So again, the optimum result for me is to bring all of you with me to the show and have some ideas on how to do that better next year. But maybe I'll just give you a quick outline. So I arrived Sunday, and almost immediately we went to CES Unveiled. CES is one of the only times I actually get to see everyone else from Mobile Nations because a lot of the times the Android Central guys or the Windows guys don't go to my events, and I certainly don't go to the events like Mobile World Congress or CTIA that they go to because Apple doesn't go to those events. So CES is the only time of the year that we're all at the same show together. So we get to see each other. I get to meet the new writers that they bring along from their sites, and then we all go to CES Unveiled. And there's several of these press events during the week. Sunday was CES Unveiled. Monday, I believe, was PepCom. Tuesday was Showstoppers. And these events, because CES is so big, there are exhibitors and merchants that will pay extra to a private event or to a special event to get into a smaller room with a dedicated press audience. And these shows, these smaller shows like CS Unveiled, Pepcom, and Showstoppers, they basically bribe bloggers with food. They put up very nice buffets in the middle, and then there's booths all around that, like CES at a micro scale. And because there's no buyers and no consumers, you have much more time to talk to them. Of course, a lot of press people have been working all day, so they run immediately to the buffet. My preferred approach is just to walk the entire room first, almost in a spiral pattern, almost the way you break up something into a search grid. And I just want to look for interesting things. Um, I mean, the worst case scenario is I see exactly the same row after row after row after row, wall after wall after wall after wall of iPhone cases that I saw last year, now taller for the iPhone 5, or now with lightning connectors. Because that's not really exciting. I mean, you might buy a next iPhone case and you might want to see what it looks like, but that's not the kind of CES I signed up for. The kind of CES I like is, 2008 when they introduced the Palm Pre, or some of the 2010, I think it was, when all the new health accessories started coming out, when there are more things that really show us how the change is occurring, or what greater size swaths we're going to see in the coming year. And this year it was kind of a mixed bag. We did get those walls and walls of iPhone cases, and we posted a lot of them. And Steve Strez in the chat room is saying, getting psyched for Macworld. And that's true. There's a bit of a dichotomy. Macworld used to be where you saw all that stuff for Apple. And then CES decided to go after that, and they got some members of the iOS community to kind of help them out and make a dedicated area. And it started off being bifurcated, and now a lot of companies will go to CES because they have to, and then not go to Macworld anymore because they don't really need to, and that's bad for Macworld, and it's forced Macworld to change from more of an expo into more of a fan style event. And I'm still going to absolutely go next month and try and do the same thing I did at CES, but it does create that extra tension when it comes to covering Apple at CES. So you go through all the different booths. Most of them have very big signs. Some of them do anything they can to get attention. One of the booths this year, I think it was a Hyper booth, had young women in full body paint up on, not moving, almost statuesque in the middle of their section. Another group had a Ferrari in the middle of their booth. Lots of people just have big lights, big signs, and it's a lot of noise and a lot of chaos. But in there, we did see some trends emerging. For example, everything is becoming connected, and one of the best examples of that at this show was something called Happy Fork. To back up a little bit, I did a segment for ABC earlier in the week when I was there, and the four things they asked me about, and I'll talk about each of these, were 4K televisions, giant phone phablets. I don't remember what the third one was right now, but the fourth one was the Happy Fork. And what we're seeing now is that everything is becoming mobile. It's not just your phone. There can be Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and metric analysis and connectivity built into everything. And we saw this earlier with blood pressure checkers and scales and pedometers were all going mobile. And now something as workaday as the fork is becoming mobile. And what it does is, as you eat, it measures how fast you're eating, and if you're eating at too fast a pace, depending on what you've set, it'll actually vibrate to tell you to slow down and enjoy your food more, and to eat at a more healthy pace. And that's the kind of stuff we're seeing. We're seeing this sort of mobile technology being put into everything. And I think that was the absolute most exciting trend, because in the early days, it was just about what you could do for your iPhone. You could make it look different by putting on a case. You could make it last longer by strapping on a battery. And it was all these accessories servicing the iPhone and later on the iPad. Whereas now we've gotten to the point where the iPhone and iPad are being used as platforms to service our lives in general, our lifestyle in general, and all the technology that makes it up. We have our phones with us all the time now. Smartphones have enough market share, enough phones are smartphones now that they're nearly ubiquitous. And because we have these with us, everyone else can now build value on that platform beyond just protecting it and powering it. And we're seeing that in a lot of ways. Uh, Pinch hitting for Android Central, Derek Kessler and I went to the LG booth and saw what they're doing with their Optimus G series. And the phone itself is one thing. I mean, they're doing some interesting things with the phone, but LG, like Samsung, is not just even a consumer electronics company or a mobile company or even a computer company. And we kept joking about the Android oven and the Android fridge. But that kind of stuff is not a joke anymore. There really is Android built into the vacuum cleaner and built into your kitchen appliances. And their phones, sure, I mean, you'll be able to get an iOS app for a lot of this or an Android app for a lot of this. But when one company is doing all of it, and a company that is way bigger, not in profits, but in scope than Apple, that has all these divisions, is doing that, then you start to have a connected ecosystem. And the demo we got was, you're on your way home from work and your wife or husband calls and says, look, I'm bringing my friend or my boss or my relative over. Is the vacuuming done? And you press a button and the little Roomba like LG or Samsung branded vacuum starts cleaning your house. And the refrigerator checks and tells you, oh, you don't have enough milk. You better pick some up on your way home. And it's sort of like the Jetsons. It's sort of like that life in the future that we were promised for so many years, so many decades. We're finally getting to a point where it's cheap enough and convenient enough that all of these things can start working together. Brian is saying it makes us lazier, and there is that aspect to it, but the other aspect is it lets us unbind our life. We don't have to be there in front of something all the time. We can go out and do things and let technology take over the more mundane aspects. I mean, it's not Star Trek The Next Generation yet, where there's no need to work and everyone can devote themselves to their ideals and their dreams. But it is getting to a point where a certain level of activity is going to be taken care of for us, and we will be allowed to do things that are beyond that. And some of us will use that as an excuse to work more and disappear more and be less social, but some of us will use that as an opportunity to be more connected and more out and more free and accomplish more than we were able to do. Technology in and of itself is never good or bad. It's how we use it and how our personalities and environments and behaviors and the people around us let us use that kind of stuff. So for me, the connected device and everything being mobile, even though it's early days, I think that's terribly exciting. And that's not something I know I have a clear idea how Apple is going to contend with is the wrong word, but how Apple is going to approach in the near future, because unlike the LGs and the Samsungs, they don't have these divisions. They don't have television sets in every room, refrigerators in every house, stoves in every kitchen, vacuum cleaners on every floor. They don't have the components to make a combined offering. And that was always Apple's advantage before. They had all the media hub components. You could go from an Apple mobile device to a computer to an Apple TV. You could get software for your Mac, software for your iPhone, and all of that just worked together. But now the scale of consumer computer appliances has grown, and Apple no longer can service that entire ecosystem themselves. So whether it'll be partner opportunities, whether Apple will selectively start exploring stuff, maybe expanding into things that are dumber than computers but smarter than appliances, or whether they'll make deals with companies like Nest or Hue, Hue with Philips, and try and create their own larger ecosystem is going to be an interesting question to see in the near term future. Scion West is saying they're being overran by a market and a flood of Android devices, and that's true in a way. And I'm not by any means trying to disparage Android by saying this, but you can have flood of volume. Whether something is as good or not is a separate question from how ubiquitous it is and what its hold on the marketplace is. So Apple has so far been very content to carefully pick and choose. Android in some ways is fired off like like not even like a shotgun, but like that striker, that auto feed shotgun. They just shoot shell after shell after shell and does maximum blast average everywhere, hoping that it gets its target. At the meantime, Apple is very content to be a sniper and sit there and carefully plan their shots and knock down one target at a time. Um, but it'll be interesting to see how far that scales and how fast technology moves. Because no matter how good a sniper you are, there will be a scale of people or a scale of targets at which you cannot hit even the selected amount that you think are important to your business. So 2013, 2014, we're gonna have to see how Apple addresses that. Then there was the more fun stuff, giant screen televisions, 4K televisions. So we have 1080p TVs now, and 2160p TVs, instead of being called that, or instead of being called 4K, which they used to be called, are now called Super HD, super high definition. Uh, and in some ways they're cool. In some ways it's strange because we all have Retina iPads now. I've had Retina iPads for almost a year, and those are 1536p. So 2160p is not that different. And at 9.7 inches, that's a sharp display. And when you blow that up to 85 inches, depending on how close you are, it's not a Retina display. I mean, if you stand far enough away, it is. But as fast as they're increasing pixel density, they're increasing size. And so they're making basically the same quality bigger instead of saying making better quality. Now, maybe some people don't care about the pixels on their television, but when you talk about a mythical Apple television and Retina, it's important to understand that it's not like on the mobile devices we have now. It's more like the televisions we have now, just making them bigger. And we saw demonstrations of broadcast HD, Super HD TV, and that's going to require SD channels to get the hell off of the bandwidth, so that we have it to get off of the signal, so there's more room for Super HD. They showed Netflix streaming over Super HD, which to me was really artifacted, but to push that many pixels over an internet stream's pretty impressive. But how many people will have the bandwidth cap and the speed that'll take advantage of it? That's going to be interesting to see as well, and whether Apple does ever enter a panel market, make something like the Thunderbolt display for television at a bigger size and at a higher resolution. Because that's right now, those sets are going to go for $20,000 or more, but they're not going to stay there long. When I was in Hong Kong in 1999, a 24-inch plasma TV was $25,000, and now those are under $1,000 for a really large size television. So that's another area that's interesting. Super large size phones. We saw the Galaxy Note 2 last year, 5.5 inches, I believe that was. Now they have 6-inch phones being introduced. So at what point is it no longer a phone and is it a tablet? At what point should you just own your inner size queen, prop an iPad mini on your shoulder and walk around like an 80s boombox? I'm not sure yet. I think 6 inches is too large to be a phone, but maybe you don't want to buy a tablet. Maybe you want something in between that can still make phone calls for you. Maybe there is a market there. I think it's safe to say the way that we're trending now, there is a market for larger phones. Aside from Apple, almost all the large selling phones, which basically means Samsung, are larger size. And no matter how good an iPhone is, if someone believes they want a larger phone and Apple doesn't make a larger phone, they will lose some part of the addressable market. And part of that is people who really need a larger phone because they're doing something like note taking, or they're doing something that, watching a lot of videos, playing a lot of games, and that's a priority for them over pocketability and over one-handed ease of use. And that's certainly, if that's your preference, who are we to say that's a bad preference? You're equally entitled to your opinion. But for some people, you just go into a phone store. If you're not shopping in an Apple store, but you're shopping at a carrier store, you just go in and you see all these phones. And imagine you walked into Best Buy, and I think I've said this before. Imagine you walk into Best Buy and every television set, regardless of size, was the same price. Or imagine bigger TVs were actually cheaper than smaller TVs. You would get the largest TV that you could fit into your house. Some people would care about who made it, what the screen technology is, what the graphics engine is, other factors like that. But for some people, it will be a simple matter of, this is the biggest television that I can put into my house. And now you walk into a carrier store, and because of subsidies, the phones all cost the same regardless of size. In some cases, like the Nokia 920, Lumia 920, it's bigger than an iPhone and it costs half as much as an iPhone. And for some people, that's compelling. Look, I'm getting a bigger screen for half the price. That's their buying behavior. And Apple right now is choosing not to engage with them. Now you could say Apple never engaged with netbook owners, but these aren't people who are looking for a bad product at a low price. These are people who are looking for a certain feature that Apple is not providing. And there are other large, well-priced phones that are large sized that aren't cheaply made. I mean, HTC makes nice phones, Nokia makes nice phones. There's a market for larger screen phones, and it'll be interesting to see if Apple chooses to address that. They have made multiple versions of many products. They have not made one for the iPhone yet. You can get an iPad in 2 screen sizes now. You've been able to get Macs in multiple screen sizes for a long time. Will the iPhone go to multiple screen sizes? That's probably the best way to increase the addressable market. And there's ways to do that by just increasing screen size but keeping the same pixel count, or going to at 3x or eventually at 4x, because Android phones already have the ludicrous 1080p 440 ppi displays. So that kind of technology exists now, and it's something to consider. And at the opposite end, we have the much rumored iPhone Nano, or budget iPhone, which actually has been rumored since July of 2007. Analysts have been saying Apple is coming out with a cheaper iPhone. And so far, Apple's strategy has been to take last year's iPhone, knock $100 off, and more recently take the 2-year-old iPhone and hack $200 off and offer it free on contract. But that phone, free on contract, is still $450, $500 off contract, and in emerging markets, in markets where cheap Android phones, BlackBerry 6 and 7 devices, cheaper, sometimes still Symbian phones by Nokia and others, have massive amounts of market share. I think most of RIM's market share these days, until BlackBerry 10 ships, is those emerging market phones. And while I don't think Apple will ever make a cheap product, just like they never made a netbook, Apple has shown that they're very, very good at making less expensive products. Instead of a Mac Pro, you can get a Mac Mini, which gets rid of the screen. You can get an iPod Shuffle that gets rid of the screen. Obviously, they won't get rid of the screen on an iPhone, but just like the iPad Mini lowered the price a little bit by compromising on the density of the screen, there are a lot of ways that Apple could take something like an iPhone 3GS or an iPhone 4, increase the size of the display so it's compatible with modern apps, give it a Thunderbolt port so it's compatible with modern accessories, and still package it in a way that is less expensive off contract, so that it can compete in those emerging markets. And maybe offer them in colors the way Apple has offered colored versions of their products at the lower end before. So there's a lot of room for Apple to, again, increase the amount of the addressable market without compromising on the quality or sort of general style of their products. Brian is asking, how does Ubuntu phones fit in? They don't yet. They are not shipping for a while, and that's going to be an interesting battleground. There's Open WebOS, there is the Mozilla operating system, there is Ubuntu, there is the Samsung Hobby of the Month, which used to be Bada and now is Tizen, and there's a lot of sort of 4th, 5th, 6th, I don't know if you want to call them operating systems, but they are projects that are out there. And just as people used to joke that it's the year of desktop Linux, it's always the year of mobile Linux, Android aside, and maybe one of those will catch on, but it's going to be hard in this market. So yeah, the big phone, the quasi-phablet, the tablet, that was an interesting trend at CES as well. And basically what you do is you wake up, you go to the show floor, you walk around all day, you talk to the press or marketing contacts, they tell you what's coming up. Casemate was interesting. They're switching from making all different kinds of cases to making high-end cases. So instead of kickstands and different kinds of plastics and things like that, they are putting real wood, real gemstone, real materials into their cases. They're all almost identical cases, but they have different back panels made of some kind of real-world, high-quality, premium material, because they believe that everyone has the basic case and people are looking for something more now. And then you look at Incipio and Griffin, and they really are still making everything. They have a couple premium cases, but then they have all the kickstand cases, the heavy protection cases, the light protection cases, the hostile environment suits for your phone, and they have things that aren't things that are more camera focused, or things that control other devices, and they're going still much broader with their approach, and all that stuff is really interesting to see because there's a lack of stability. There's almost a turbulence in the market, and you have people like Olloclip who are expanding on their photography by making a case that goes with it, so you can attach tripods, and you can attach flashes, and you can do all these other things to not only add value to your iPhone, but to add value to your photography, and to bring all these things sort of to life. And actually the best part about CES for me is, in addition to seeing all the people from Mobile Nations, is this year NVIDIA sponsored a contest for us where people could win a chance to go to CES with us and attend some of the events and go to the trade floor. And we threw a party for them on Tuesday night. And just being able to meet the people that are kind enough and gracious enough to interact with you and to comment on your stories and to engage in your forums, it's a real privilege. To be able to say thank you to them is an absolute privilege. And we had a great time at that event. And then one of the kind of things that can only happen at CES happened a couple of years ago. We got into a limousine, and a guy asked if he could share it with us, and it turned out that he was one of the major people running Android at Google, and we got to spend a very enjoyable limo ride with him, asking us our thoughts about Android and him telling us sort of some of his thoughts about Android. And this year at the Mobile Nations party, some of the folks from RIM came, say hello to Kevin, and then lo and behold, the CEO of BlackBerry, Torsten Heinz, showed up, and he was very gracious. He greeted a lot of his BlackBerry fans there, and I got to spend a good 30 minutes with him, not on the record, not an interview, but just two guys at a party talking about the future of user interface and user experience. And he was completely realistic, grounded in reality, no distortion fields. He knows the current marketplace. He knows the devices on it. And he knows where he believes BlackBerry can still provide something different, something that he doesn't feel is being addressed by the current crop of phones. And to hear him talk about where he thinks user experience should go and where he wants BlackBerry to take it is one of the things that can only happen at CES, at least for me, because I don't, unlike Kevin Mitchelluk and other people, I don't get to cover BlackBerry every day. And those kind of things tend to happen at CES, which I think makes it still valuable and makes it still interesting as a show. So that was CES, pretty much my experience. I landed on Sunday, I left on Wednesday. Some of the other Mobile Nation guys lasted much longer than I did. And it's a really grueling schedule, and I managed to get food poisoning the first day I was there, so it was not without its collateral damage, but it was a lot of fun, and I look forward to going to it next year, and I look forward to going to Macworld next month. So we're going to keep doing this live coverage, and we're going to keep trying to find better ways of including you in it. And if you have any ideas for that, or anything you want to see done differently or done more of or done better, you can always shoot me an email or yell at me on Twitter, and we will absolutely take care of that. So on to iOS device rumors. These always seem to come up right before the holidays. They always seem to persist over the holidays, probably because news isn't very prevalent over the holidays, and the news cycle abhors a vacuum. So when there's a lack of news, rumors kind of increase. And when there's anticipation in a product cycle, rumors increase. And let's face it, we want this stuff. We want the next iPhone. We want the next iPad. People know we want this, so telling us about it, it's like free candy, right? Because we're going to run to it. We're going to look at it. Some of it comes from blogs. Some of it comes from analysts. I believe a lot of it comes from analysts that read blogs and then write stuff that gets reblogged, and it's sort of a self-perpetuating cycle, which is why iMore doesn't cover analysts, or almost never covers analysts, and I don't think we're poorer for it. And I mean investment analysts. I don't mean industry analysts. There's a very large difference between someone who covers mobile and someone who is working in a financial institution and has clients whose interests are involved, are whose interests are different than those of yours and mine. So we're very careful about this. But it's absolutely what happens. People are always talking about what's next. The day after you buy an iPhone, you start thinking about what the next one will be. You hold it in your hand and you say, I love it, but, and that but inevitably turns into, I hope Apple next time does this. And most of us here aren't normal consumers. Normal consumers buy a phone, use it until it breaks, get a new one, unless there's some incredibly compelling feature that breaks them from their contractual update cycle. They're buying the next phone when they have to, not when they want to. In fact, when they have to is when they want to. But for those of us who love stuff, who love gadgets, who love technology, we're really into this. So I'm really careful about it. I believe that you guys give us a lot of attention and a lot of confidence, and I don't want to ever take advantage of that. So we're really careful when it comes to these kinds of rumors. And one of the things is there's just the of course aspect. Apple, of course, is working on the next couple of iPhones, the next couple of iPads. Apple has not retired from the business of making mobile devices. So some of it is not really news. If you put up a headline saying Apple is working on the next iPhone and the next iPad, yeah, of course. That's not the headline. The headline might be developer discovers iPad model string or new iPhone model string in their logs, or iOS 7 shows up in website analytics. And then the thing itself is not the story, but it's almost the signpost of where we are in the development cycle is the story. And so one of the questions in the chat room right now is the iPhone 5 quad core? Will the next iPhone be quad core? Things like that are interesting. A lot of the ways that you can tell what Apple's going to do is what the technology on the market is. Apple can't do certain things unless the technology is available. For example, Apple was not going to do an LTE phone until a certain chipset was available from Qualcomm. Apple can't release faster MacBooks until Intel puts out faster processors. In many ways, Apple's release cycle is bound on one side by the release cycle of their component makers. So is Apple going to put out a quad-core phone? That's the wrong question. That's the question that looks at feeds and speeds. That's the question that looks at how Android used to be sold. Nobody should care whether Apple puts out a quad-core phone or not. The question is, what feature would Apple need quad-core to support? iOS has been multi-threaded for a very long time, and developers have been told, not to throw everything on one core for a long time. When you can start offloading processes to cores, you can do some interesting stuff. But what really requires 4 cores now? For some phones, you need multiple cores because you don't control the hardware and the software, and you have to use hardware to accelerate the software at a much larger scale. So you maybe want to use a core to handle basic OS functions. You want to use another core to handle media functions, another core to move those media functions around. In those instances, being able to put threads on different cores are really important. For Apple, they're going to look and see what can we do with 4 cores. If we don't need them, then they are just an unnecessary component cost, an unnecessary power drain, and frankly, we don't need them. So maybe something like onboard Siri. Google now does a lot of their transactions on device. And for example, things like alarms, things like working with the clock in general, anything that adding something to a contact, anything that does not require the internet could be done on device. And maybe that has a high enough tax that Apple's going to want to offload that to another core. And that might encourage them to go to a 4-core processor if 2 cores is not enough. If they can do it on 2 cores, why in the world would they want to do that on 4 cores? Siri in general is going to be interesting, and I wrote an article a while ago about the future of Apple and services, and I wrote another article today about it that I'll get to in a minute. But anything like that, they will address not in terms of solutions users think they need, but in terms of problems that users need solved. And the classic example of that is we need multitasking was a solution we thought we wanted. Apple looked and said, you want to play Pandora in the background, here's an API, because that was the problem that you had. And sometimes that works great, sometimes not perfectly enough. But in most cases, it provides a measured solution instead of just a widely opened one that has a high price on another side. So that's the kind of thing I think that we'll see from Apple, if you look at hardware, there'll be an A7 chipset, eventually. We'll get an LTE radio that can do simultaneous LTE voice and data eventually. We'll get one that can run voice over LTE eventually. We'll get whatever next generation processor. Maybe Apple will start making their own GPUs. We'll get there eventually. All of that hardware stuff, there will be a certain limit. I mean, once you get a Retina display in the iPad mini, that ideal, that Platokian form of iPad is pretty much done. Once the iPad 4 gets thinner and lighter in the new design language, Apple's reached that goal. So it becomes, what's next? Is it biometric sensors and security? Is it 802.11 EC? I mean, there's just based on the technology that exists in our universe, there's a limit as to how far and how fast hardware can go, especially if you think that Apple's going to put out 2 iPads a year every year from now on. They'll get to that limit much faster. And then what's next? Once you achieve your ideal, what do you do then? That becomes a really, really interesting question. And yes, in the chat room, I missed who said it, but someone said Georgia wants it was Einolson says Georgia wants wearable technology. That's a peripheral. That's maybe wearable computing will be a big thing in the future, and we'll once again remicrosize everything and have to build up from a smaller platform and discover new, like whatever multi-touch was to the iPhone, whether it's Siri or gesture, distance gestures, whatever that is, to wearable computing will be what's next. But for me right now, yeah, sure, Apple's working on an iPad mini with a Retina display. As soon as they can make that, as soon as they have technology to allow them to put enough LED light in there or use less LED light to achieve the same results, to light up that size and that density panel, as soon as they can power it for 10 hours, as soon as they can do it thinly enough that you can still have an iPad mini at roughly the same size, the iPad mini with Retina will be released. As soon as they can make the iPad 4 smaller and thinner, that will be released. Those are just obvious next steps. The iPhone 5S will come out. The iPhone 6 will come out. That we're limited by hardware now. For a lot of people, the hardware they have in their hand already is enough. They don't need more. What we need now from Apple is software and especially services. I mentioned Google Now earlier, and Google went from lagging behind Siri, facing a product that could intermediate them out of search on iOS, which is incredibly lucrative, way more lucrative. There's a saying, and it has still not been disproven or outdated, that Google makes way more money off iOS than they make off Android. But technologies like Google Now are going far beyond Siri by providing predictive results and doing things in a much more forward-thinking way, while Siri is still struggling to do basically all online, limited set of features. And Apple in general is struggling with this. We saw Game Center outages, iMessage outages, iCloud outages, and that kind of stuff can't be good enough anymore. It has to be great. Apple has to become as good at services as they are in software. Apple's a really, really good software company. People moan and complain about stuff like skeuomorphism, which is frankly irrelevant. Skeuomorphism is a fad. It's a fashion. Whether something's skeuomorphic or not is irrelevant. Whether iOS gets a makeover or not is irrelevant. I mean, your personal tastes may love it or hate it, but that is of absolutely no importance to the future of the platform. Whether iOS 7 is all silver or is polka dotted means absolutely nothing if Apple can't get their software and their services to the point where they need to be. That's a coat of paint. That's not the mechanics underneath it. And that's the part we need to see from Apple now. iOS 6 was all about getting Google off their platform, outsourcing social, and adding new features for China. It was a way for Apple to get total control of their own destiny in the parts that they wanted to, and the parts they didn't want to make sure they were covered by other people. And it was a foundation, but it cost them a year. It cost them a year where Google put out Jelly Bean and Microsoft put out Windows Phone 8 and BlackBerry got close to putting out BlackBerry 10. And that was an important year. And now the pressure on Apple for 2013 is extensive because they don't need to reach feature parity, but they need to figure out a way to provide services as good as these other companies are figuring out ways to provide software. And that's non-trivial, because from Google to Facebook to Amazon, they're just buying good iOS developers, good iOS designers, and that's relatively easy to do. You can buy Snapseed, you can buy all these different, you can buy Sofa, you can buy all these different companies and, Sparrow, and put their designers to work, but you can't buy a cloud infrastructure. And we haven't seen the kind of evidence that Apple's got a next generation cloud infrastructure the way they had Cocoa Touch for iOS, or the way that they've been moving Objective-C forward. And maybe they're doing it secretly, maybe not, but it's something they need to address, because we need to have Siri be best in class. We should want that. Everyone should want that. Everyone should want Siri to be so good that Google has pressure to make Google Now even better. BlackBerry is going to be out soon. They're going to offer a BlackBerry Connect. And you can say what you want about RIM, but they've got a lot of practice running large networks. I mean, they've run BBM for years. They had the Network Operations Center, NOC, for years. And they're going to be offering some interesting stuff. And there's a lot of places where Apple's been doing things sort of in the background, like with Springboard and Backboard, and with XPC and headless apps and communications protocols and security protocols. But that kind of stuff is going to need to start coming to the surface. We have spent a lot of time, people still say they want widgets on the iOS home screen, or they want this or that feature from Android. And to me, that's the thing of the past. That's a relic. That's an era gone by. The last thing I want is to have to go to a home screen to find something. The next generation of interface is going to be about stuff coming to us. And I think Google Now, again, is a great example of that. With Siri, I've got to hold down a button and ask for stuff, and then Siri goes and gets it. With widgets, I've got to go to the home screen and scroll around and find them, and then I got to glance at them. That's all pull. That's me doing a lot of work. And I don't want to do that work. I want that stuff to come to me. And whether it's actionable notifications, and I see George is in the chat room, so she'll get this, whether it's stuff like Byte SMS, where I don't have to leave letterpress, go to messages, answer, come back to letterpress, and keep playing, but a notification comes down, I can quickly type an iMessage or an email response or any kind of quick text passage and send it, and keep going about the app with no change of state. That's great. If an alarm goes off, now I've got to go to the alarm thing, reset it, do all these things. If an alarm or a reminder goes off, and I can, inside the notification, reset it or snooze it or quickly change the time to another time, then I'm not changing state. I'm just empowered to have the stuff where I want it, when I want it, and do something with it that doesn't involve me jumping around an old style interface. And I think that's where it gets really interesting. If I go to Siri, and this is the classic example from Roger McNamee in the old days of Palm, something that WebOS never achieved, but that he explained very concisely a long time ago, is my phone is with me. It knows my calendar, it knows my coordinates. It's hooked into maps and traffic data. If I'm sleeping and there's been a huge accident and I have a meeting across town and my iPhone knows all these things, Siri should wake me up, set an alarm, even though I didn't set it, but have the alarm go off, tell me, Rene, there's been an accident on Route 87. You're not going to make your meeting now. I have rerouted you to Route 63, but you have to leave now. Would you like to text or message the people you're meeting with to tell them that you might be late? Then Siri goes from being something that I'm calling all the time to something that's coming up to me and giving me information all the time. It goes from being pull to being push. And at that point, interface the way we have now starts to break away. Something is not skeuomorphic if you never see it. It's not boring if you never see it. If all of the things, again, all the routine, mundane tasks that we have to accomplish every day start getting done for us by applications that have no interface, that can communicate in between them, not really intense on Android or contracts on Windows Phone, but if there really is a way for them to securely pass data back and forth so that it has the pool of information it needs to predict what I need and do it for me, then that starts to become very powerful. And our whole idea of an interface is changed. It's no longer a home button icon, hold down home button, talk to Siri. It's just your phone is there telling you what you need to know when you need to know it. And to do this kind of stuff, Apple services, which right now run web objects from 1802, I'm being a little bit facetious there, but it doesn't feel like Apple has, at least from the stuff that we've seen, from the dark matter around it, from the radiation leaking from the borders of the black hole, is preparing for that future. And you can make fun of Google all you want. Their store crashed when they're trying to sell the Nexus 4. They can't even do stores right. Or you can make fun of Windows Phone because its information density is low and it's very limited in what it can do, and it never seems to take off no matter how much Office or Windows money Microsoft throws at it. Or you can make fun of BlackBerry saying they're dead and they're no longer in the market, and they used to run on Java. But it's something all these companies are working really, really hard on. And I just hope, maybe Apple is working on it every bit as hard and they're just much better at keeping it a secret. I just hope Apple really is working on that, because phones today are not good. Phones tomorrow are not going to be what they are today. Everything is moving. Apple is usually very, very good at obsoleting themselves. Long before the iPod declined, the iPhone arrived, the iPad arrived. But those are all device-centric solutions, and it's becoming an increasingly service-oriented world. Frankly, Google's services kind of suck. I know it's not popular to say that, but they're free and they're ubiquitous, but they're not enjoyable. Um, Google Docs is not great. It's just nothing is better. Gmail is not great. It's just nothing is better. There's huge opportunities, whether it's Microsoft with Outlook or RIM with what they're doing with BlackBerry 10. But no one owns the space yet. Facebook is working on a phone. They're going to come out with something. Amazon is using Google's technology to compete with Google. None of these companies are standing still. We are waiting to be delighted the same way we are with Apple hardware, and used to be with Apple software and still are in many cases. We're waiting to be delighted with our services, with stuff that looks great, works great, doesn't require a lot of effort, is reliable, is stable, and does what we want. We're waiting for that. We are willing to throw. The thing with services is there's a huge chance for migration. Friendster went to MySpace, went to Facebook. People went to Twitter. People are going to app.net. You can migrate services, especially free services. Yes, you have a lot of stuff caught up in them, but you can migrate from these things. So there's endless opportunity there. And I think all the big companies know that, and it's going to be an increasingly important battleground, which is why earlier today I wrote that article that, yes, we're seeing leaks about iPhone 5S and iPhone 6, and we're seeing leaks about the next iPad mini and the next iPad, and there will be new iOS devices in the spring, and there will be new iOS devices in the fall, but it's the new software and services in July that I really want to see that's going to hold it all together, that's going to make one of my devices all of my devices. It's going to let me start to do the kinds of stuff that they have shown me is possible. And that's the kind of stuff I'm excited about. I'm not bored by any means with iOS hardware, but it's become more of a known commodity, and they've done such a good job with that it feels like the software and services need to catch up now. And Apple's always said that they are a software company that makes their own hardware so that the software can be so good. And that is something that needs to be proven over and over and over again, every month, every year. That's not something you can do once and have people believe forever. So, Apple's filled with incredibly smart engineers, incredibly good designers. They have all the potential in the world, but services is just not part of their DNA. And some people in the chat room are saying they're bored with iOS, and I don't really accept that as a premise. I mean, the Mac has been the same for years. Windows, RT is new, but Windows was the same for years. It's not that it's boring. A coat of paint won't fix these problems. The thing is that we're transitioning to something that's next. If Apple came out in 2013, all they did was make the aluminium theme for iOS, and people like, oh yay, it looks different. I'd be disappointed in people. I think the next thing has to be bigger than just a coat of paint. That it's not that it's boring. Boring, they can throw a widget at you. That doesn't solve your problems. That again is people thinking they want a certain solution and not identifying the problem that they have. iOS is bringing hundreds of millions of people behind it. It has to be usable by your mom, by someone's grandmother, by a 4-year-old, by a power user. It has to be usable by a huge swath of people, and that in some ways constrains it, and that in some ways empowers it. Now, Sion West is saying iOS should be on the Apple TV with apps. That's interesting too, because that's not Apple's strategy so far. And people have said also that Siri should have APIs. Apple is not so far using an app strategy on the television or with Siri. They're using a partnering strategy. And that means they make a deal with Hulu, or they make a deal with the Wall Street Journal, or a deal with Major League Baseball, and they get a dedicated channel on the Apple TV, the way YouTube used to have an app on the iPhone, and the way Weather is a Yahoo app, sort of a Yahoo Fed app on the iPad. Apple similarly has made deals like with OpenTable for Siri, or with Major League Sports for Siri. If they provide an open API, those deals are worthless. Choosing best of breed content and information providers doesn't exist in our world with an open API, because everyone would just make an app. It wouldn't matter who Apple picked to supply a channel for the Apple TV or to supply information for Siri, because everybody could do it. And those are two very different strategies, and they're not strategies that can coexist. So until Apple changes from channel strategies with the Apple TV and with Siri, we won't see apps for the Apple TV or for Siri. I mean, you might see limited Apple TV, like maybe they'll make deals with gaming companies, but again, it'll be not an open SDK or an open API the way that exists on the iPhone or iPad. It's just not what Apple's doing now, and Apple may not think that it works as well for Siri as it does for serial television, the way it does for iOS. For example, with Siri, you have to worry about collision. Siri, do this, and there's 8 apps that are using the API to do that. Which of these 8 apps do you want to use? That has to be handled by the UI, and it has to be non-frustrating and non-wasteful for a user. A lot of the stuff, it sounds good, but you start thinking through the problems, or not the problems, but how Apple would have to address the solution, and they become less trivial. They become more complicated. So I still think going forward, Apple at the core has to address the services. And once they've done that, then, Brian is saying a built-in Blu-ray player. Again, Blu-rays are the past. 4K doesn't fit on Blu-ray. They're already putting servers next to your television set. A lot of the things that we think we want, by the time we think we want them, are no longer relevant. And that's the thing with Apple. You have to skate to where the puck is going to be. And the puck is not widgets, and it's not Blu-ray, and it's not apps the way that we think about them today. Where's the puck going to be? That's the question Apple has to answer this year, and it looks like it's going to be more services oriented, and that's the problem Apple's engineers are going to have to solve this year. So that, in a nutshell, is my one-man show about CES and about all the rumors that we've been seeing both over the holidays and through CES. And I think we're in for really interesting times. I mean, Apple was the newest OS on the block in 2007, and when BlackBerry 10 launches January 30th, iOS is going to be the oldest major mobile operating system. And that's an opportunity for Apple if they choose to make it. Being old can also be being mature and being ready for the next thing. And I think Apple has proven that they're a really smart company filled with really smart guys, and they have really good sensibilities about this stuff. So I look forward to it. And I want to thank all of you, everyone who showed up in the chat room, from Georgia to Sockrala to Sellison to iNolson to Hal8950 to Eric 80H, Neil Douglas, Brian, I'm going to massacre your last name, Checky, and everybody else, all of you. There's hundreds of you online. You should all, start talking more in the chat room. We'll get even more interesting questions. Make sure you sign in next time. I want to thank you guys for spending this hour with me. I really appreciate it. If you missed the live show, as always, the video version will be up tomorrow along with the downloads and the MP3 version. You can find us on iTunes. If you haven't already, please go over there. Please leave a review and a rating. It lets iTunes know you like the show, encourages them to feature the show, and that means more listeners can discover us. You can find me at Rene Ritchie on Twitter. You can find Georgia at GeorgiaTIPB. You can find Leanna at L Lofty. You can find Ali at iMuggle. You can find all of us at iMore. You can find Chris at Chris Eldroyd. Apologies, Chris. And for all of our shows, go to mobilenations.com/shows. We have a wide variety of podcasts, some for developers like Debug, some for designers like Iterate, some for our mobile lives like Zen and Tech, but you'll definitely find something you enjoy. So have a great evening. Thank you, everybody, and I'll see you soon.